Hey, welcome back, guys. With all of the lingering storylines and unanswered questions in Raising Kanan this season, we are headed for a very special finale, the types that only classics are made of. In this video, we'll predict how every major character's story might end in the forthcoming explosive conclusion of Raising Kanan Season 3. Before we begin, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and bell notification to immediately receive these videos. Also, big thank you to all of my channel donors. If you'd like to be the next one, drop $1 on that Cash App for us. And lastly, a spoiler alert is now in effect for all things Power. Here we go. Now, just as a prelude to these predictions, the season finale episode description states that, quote, desperation sets in as Howard tries to evade the task force and Ronnie goes on the attack, leaving Rock and Kanan to make some fateful choices. Now, for Howard, that desperation likely leans on his previous idea that he introduced to Rock in making sure that all the blame goes to Marvin. And even in some of the newer images, we see Marvin being pressed by the FBI, likely at the funeral of Gerald, who, although betrayed Marvin did have somewhat of a connection with leading up to said betrayal. Howard is going to be doing pirouettes through hula hoops in order to evade any kind of speculation, or even worse, prosecution. And that desperation puts nothing beyond the pale for someone like Howard, who's as slimy and treacherous as they come. I mean, he did shoot his own partner in the head to begin this season. And from jump, that was him and the writers letting us know that there's nothing he won't do to save his own ass. But in order to explore these next parts, we'll go into each character. Let's start with Rock. Rock has spent this season as somewhat a woman divided. In the beginning stages, she tried to distance herself from the game in an effort to protect her son and her family at large from the ways of the streets. But after realizing that the game is rigged on both sides and that in the legitimate world, there's just as much seedy behavior as there was in the streets, she opted to continue in the field that suited her most, that she excelled best in, and that was way more profitable than that legitimate world, which came with lines and rules. If you're pressed by a police officer or a criminal posing as a police officer, there's no violent maneuver that you can make in retaliation. But if you're in the streets and someone presses you in the streets, oh, you got leverage to act. So why not get money in that world? I mean, after all, it's what you were made for. This was the thinking that went into Rock getting back into the game, but she never anticipated that she'd be going against her son. And as it stands, Rock has 3 main problems going into episode 10: Snaps, Pop, and Ronnie. Now, as for Ronnie, there's no hope for reconciliation. He hates Rock, for some reasons we do know, and for other reasons we don't, both highly speculate upon. But when it comes to Snaps and Pop, that's an entirely different issue altogether, as this commentator believes that there is some hope for diplomacy between the three, as Snaps and Pop, although classic criminal figures, are retired at this point and have relegated themselves to the realm of investment. Rock is also a businesswoman, opting more for the finances of the street game than the violence, although not averse to the violence if it should ever come. With all of these components in mind, there is a deal to be made between Rock and Snaps and Pop, one that could perhaps bury the hatchet between them, and even make Snaps and Pop whole again after the fallout between them and Ronnie and their heroin connect. And consider this too, once upon a time, Unique and Rock were bitter enemies, even trying to kill each other in earlier seasons of Raising Kanan. And not only did they mend their relationship in transformative ways over time, but they also started a romantic relationship, which was most surprising to us who had followed this series from its inception. So never underestimate the power of self-interest, because between Rock, Snaps, and Pop, their common denominator is Ronnie, in the form of their collective discontent. We saw Snaps and Pop all but threaten Ronnie in episode 9, following him losing his connect, and by extension, their investment into his business. If Rock comes and supplements that, oh, there is a deal to be made, which leads us to Ronnie. Ronnie was introduced to us at the top of this season and has weaved his way around South Jamaica, Queens as somewhat as the hood boogeyman, a man of few words but much action, once driven by his one true desire, and that's empowerment. This desire, coupled with his disdain for his brother's actions in assisting in the loss of his power, caused him to do the unthinkable to his brother. And to this point, Unique is off the board. Then, upon noticing a similar drive and desire in a young Kanan, he took Raquel's son under his wing and began to mold him in a sense while piggybacking off the business enterprise that he built, manipulating Kanan simultaneously. So to this point, Ronnie also has the most bodies this season if we're talking kill count, because not only did he murder his brother, but he murdered Dean, their former connect, a flagrant security guard, whose only crime against Ronnie was diarrhea of the mouth, and anyone else in between who dared get in his way. So the question is, how will Ronnie's story end? When we last saw him, he was in a frantic state, lamenting the loss of his business and demanding that someone pay for it. That someone being Rock, of course. We even saw him lined up with Snaps and Pop on some Legion of Doom type shit, enlisting Kanan in a plot to overthrow his own mother, once and for all. But this commentator believes that that blood will prove thicker than water, and blood, in fact, is undefeated. So how will this thing really play out for Ronnie? Many of you believe that he's going to end up in Stefano's furnace, which would be really dope, by the way, because although they showed us that furnace, we've yet to see the true power and might of it. Not one body has entered it since it was introduced, and it would be cathartic if Ronnie was the first, because Ronnie's actions this season has been the absolute worst, and deserving of hellfire. And that symbology will be the best definition of standing on business, of karma coming back to someone in the fiercest way. And who knows, as I suggested under Rock's predictions, could a deal be worked out with Snaps and Pop with Rock at the helm and exchanging Ronnie's life or their help in delivering Ronnie for compensation of sorts? Of course, they would have to relinquish Rock's son in this deal, as she previously warned them to stay away from him. But it seems that all they're concerned about is their 401k. And if Ronnie's life is the price to pay for that, given what he did to jeopardize that 401k, then so be it. But what would be even more interesting is if someone unknown, someone that we're not even checking for, ends up ushering Ronnie into that hellfire. And that would be Unique himself. Now, I know many of you seem to believe he was alive for the longest, and I, for one, don't, and still don't. But wouldn't that be some wild shit if Unique pops up, scarred and all, in the spirit of a future grown Kanan, who was once believed to be dead following his fight with Ghost, only to show up months later, scars and all, and ready for war. And if this took place with Unique, this will be the ultimate revenge getter on his brother, almost spiritual in a sense, as it would be Nick's reclamation of not just his life, but his respect in the streets, something that Ronnie completely did away with when he beat him down like a coward from behind. Pause. And keep in mind also, the name of this episode is Made You Look, and that's more than a nod to the classic Nas song. But Made You Look is almost like what a magician does when he completes a magic trick. The trick of it all is keeping you focused on the right hand while the left hand is really moving in the shadows. And Nick could very well be in that left hand dynamic. It's also interesting to ponder upon, but we'll see how it plays out. And speaking of Made You Look, that leads us to Lou. Lulu has spent the entirety of this season under the thumb of the bottle. His drunkenness has caused major problems for not just himself, but his family at large, as he's literally stumbled into places and conversations that could have landed his entire flock in prison, all due to his guilty conscience and weakened state. That whiskey has seriously had Lou in a chokehold for much of this season, and no one tells stories like Lulu off the bottle. He's the best definition of the drunk uncle, but with worse consequences. So the question in all of our minds is, following that last car ride that we witnessed, is he dead or is he alive? And if he's alive, just where could he be? Now, in my previous video, I stated that he's likely out of town at a family member's. Most of you believe that he's at rehab. But again, I maintain that rehab will be a little unlikely for me, only because they're feeding him liquor on his way, as if to calm his nerves, which could have been solely for that reason. But I don't think if you're trying to wean somebody off something, you put them in zip ties and you feed them more of the poison that's afflicting them. I think they want Lulu out the way and restrained, and they could be dropping him somewhere where the campus is completely dry to a family member who's perhaps based in purity and is going to keep Lou on the straight and narrow. And if he has to be tied down, then it is what it is. But the Made You Look aspect of all of this is that many of us are led to believe that he was killed during that car ride or in the aftermath of that car ride. So if Lulu is still among the land of the living, then there goes that magic trick. Now let's talk about Kanan. Kanan has emerged as a serious hustler during this third season. He's risen above his mother's influence, only to establish himself in his own right and even innovate a new form of business that I think once he rejoins his mother will become fruitful for his entire family. And once she observes firsthand the foundation that he's built, she's going to have to give him that respect as a man and truly look her son eye to eye as an equal. Because during their oppositional period, he was the biggest threat to her enterprise. And that's something that, although it's pissing her off, you know inside of Rock's twisted soul, she's admiring that shit. She's like, damn, this boy is so good that he's trying to overthrow me, and I'm the queen. I know I taught him some shit. We have to get Kanan back on Rock's side, and how that will be done remains unknown. But there are certain parallels that we've seen, given the power narratives of the past. The major one that comes to mind is that of Kanan and Tariq, Tariq was forced to choose between family loyalty or loyalty to his friend. And admittedly, for Tariq, this was a harder decision because unlike Kanan and Ronnie, an older Kanan and Tariq were actually friends. They were bonded by something tougher and greater, and that was a similar experience and upbringing. Ronnie and Kanan, on the other hand, is more of a manipulative relationship because Ronnie, at the crux of it all, is merely using Kanan. Kanan started out using Tariq, but later became bonded to him and even had affection for him, almost in like a big brother/uncle sort of way. Ronnie has no such connection for Kanan, and once Kanan realizes this reality and sees right through Ronnie's manipulations, I think his decision will be an easy one. And he'll be the major catalyst in the setup, perhaps even by his mother and Snaps and Pop in the background, to propelling us towards the end of the Ronnie era. And as Yoda once said about the Sith himself, not short enough it was. And lastly, let's address Jukebox, who I've admittedly ignored most of this season. Jukebox's story is perhaps the most tragic one remaining on Raising Kanan, because this is a story really about broken dreams. Juke really had a chance to make it out of this environment, but was ultimately cursed by it. And she was thrown several alley-oops by the universe in an effort to really help her gain independence from the crime family that she only knew. Alley-oops like her friend Nicole, who unfortunately was affected by that environment negatively just by her proximity to Jukebox. But then, the universe loved her so much that he brought back Nicole's father to throw her yet another alley-oop, which is how she even got into the singing group Butter to begin with, or at least a chance to get into that group. But the seedy details of her family bit her once again, and she couldn't upend their influence. So now, the inevitable must take place as it pertains to Jukebox. She's already made a commitment to the United States government, and I think for one, that that's where she's going to be headed, especially once she's officially ousted from the group, something that hasn't taken place yet, but Nakia will be forced to do because keeping Jukebox is only going to bring a further negative light on the group. I mean, you can't have one of your singers, especially your lead singer, being simultaneously investigated by the FBI. That's bad for business, no matter what the business is. So as we're gonna see, her joining the government and law enforcement later on was inspired by these events, a way to finally get from underneath her family's drug dealing life and the police scrutiny that accompanied it. This event was vital to who Jukebox became on the legal end of her story. It was also a way to hide in plain sight while still remaining active in criminality minus the oversight. I think when she arrives on the legal side of the game and witnesses their corruption firsthand, as her Aunt Rock witnessed once she tried to go legitimate, she'll truly realize that it was all a setup from the start and only grow colder as a result. And this is why Jukebox, in the final summation, truly didn't give a F. But what are your thoughts on all of this? How do you think each major character's story is going to end? Be sure to drop me your opinions in the comments below. As always, I thank you for watching today's video. If you liked today's video, go ahead and drop $1 on that Cash App for us, hit the like button, share it with your friends who are Power fans, and subscribe for more content such as this. This is Rudy P. Magic of Rudy P. Magic Beats, and have a blessed one until the next one. Peace, y'all.